Every day, you are facing tiny choices that dictate your life. Do I work out? Do I sleep in? Do I go get coffee with Jessica, or do I just cancel on her? Do I make food at home, or do I get a Guzman and Gomez mini nachos? And while there is so much content out there on building better habits and getting better sleep and exercising, there isn't a lot of focus on what to do when you face these almost daily, like multiple times a day style choices. These are choice points that really guide how your life pans out. In this podcast episode, I want to talk about the most under-discussed habit that you can develop to glow up your life: flexible thinking, a tool that you can use whenever you face those choice points. Welcome to Grow with Intention, the podcast of people who want to create a life that feels good. I am convinced that if you want to build healthier, better habits in the new year, just in your life in general, flexible thinking is one of the number one things that you should focus on developing. So I call flexible thinking the habit before the habit, because before we make any unhelpful choices in our life, there is always a moment in time where our brain serves us up options. Our brain inevitably goes, well, do we buy the whole block of chocolate and eat it all in one go? Or do we willpower it out and just not buy the chocolate? What are we going to do? And our brain is really good at presenting us with two options. Usually it's all or nothing: work out or do nothing, eat healthy or eat trash, procrastinate completely or buckle down. Which is why when you develop the habit of flexible thinking, your life almost immediately gets an upgrade, because developing flexible thinking is about developing the ability to think above and beyond the small number of choices that your brain serves you when it comes to these choice points. In this podcast episode, I want to talk about 3 things that you can do to develop your flexible thinking muscle, starting with developing the option to notice and pause. This advice is so deeply unshiny, and I can appreciate that. It's unexciting. No one wants to hear that they need to develop the ability to pause. But most people suck at pausing. In particular, if you find yourself making unhealthy or unhelpful choices in your life, you probably have some work to do when it comes to pausing. If you can't sit there and notice when your brain throws out unhelpful choices and pause for a moment, it's so hard to start making better choices, because unless you could develop a really rigid routine where you do the exact same thing day in, day out, you see the same people, you go to the same environments, and you're never faced with these difficult options, inevitably you hit these choice points. If you want to work on just one thing to start building healthier habits in the next year, I would start with pausing. You don't even need to start with making better decisions. That's a down the line thing. Just start with developing the ability to pause and notice what is happening and when you are at choice points. And that could look like physically taking 4 deep breaths whenever you notice that you're at a choice point. It could look like getting out a notebook and noting down what's happening. It could look like saying out loud, like calling it out: oh, I noticed that I'm at a choice point right now. I can see the black and white thinking happening. Once you have mastered the pause, which I would say is the hardest part, you want to master the second step, which is actually practicing flexible thinking. There are 2 thinking habits that I like to go back to when it comes to developing my flexible thinking muscle. Number 1 being the cloud method. This is probably my preference lately. It's from the book The Corkscrew Solution, linked in the show notes. It also has roots elsewhere. I think it has a long history. This is something that you can do on paper, but I think once you've done it on paper a few times, you can start to do it in your head. So begin by thinking intentionally about what options your brain is serving you. So for example, you've gotten up, you brush your teeth, you're looking at your yoga mat, and your brain goes, ooh, we could work out, or we could go back to bed and just chill and watch TikTok for 30 minutes. Then you want to consider the benefits of both options, because both of those options have benefits. Working out, you feel energized, you feel happy with how you've started your day. Going back to bed and watching TikTok for 30 minutes, you feel cozy, you feel comfy. Then you want to ask yourself, how do I get the best of both worlds? And think of a different option outside of the ones that your brain has served you. For example, you could do one of those lying down YouTube workout videos. So you get to be in bed, you get to be cozy and comfy, but you also get to start your day in a way that feels good. You get to move your body, create a bit of energy. The more that you use something like the cloud method, the easier it will come to you. Remember that thinking habits can be automated with a lot more ease than physical habits, actually. And if you want to know more about that, I had an episode with Michelle Segar, who wrote the book The Joy Choice. I'll have that linked in the show notes. We talk a little bit about that towards the end of the podcast episode, which leads me to the next thinking habit that you can develop, which is POP, Michelle Segar's method for flexible thinking. This is a really similar thinking method, but when it comes to thinking habits, more options is better. Different things work for different people. You might be able to remember POP more easily than the cloud method, or vice versa. It's just about what resonates and what feels easy for your brain. The easier it feels, the more likely you're able to do it. So the first P in POP is for pause. This is getting some distance from your thoughts and feelings and recognizing like, ooh, I'm not my thoughts and feelings. I'm just just experiencing them. O is for opening up your options. So literally thinking of a bunch of different options in the moment that you could do outside of the two options that your brain has given you. For example, you could cancel last minute on your friend, but you could also ask her if you could go somewhere a little bit closer to you. You could also tell her, hey, I'm feeling a bit off, I'm low energy, like, can we do something more low key? You could tell her, hey, something's come up, I can only meet for an hour. You could ask her to come over to your house. That way you don't have to go anywhere. There are always so many more options than what your brain initially serves you. And the last P in POP is for picking the joy choice. So picking the choice that feels the most joyful in that moment. In every podcast episode, I always do Recs of the Week. The Rec of the Week this week has got to be The Joy Choice by Michelle Segar, and also my podcast episode with Michelle Segar. I feel like this book was my introduction to flexible thinking in general. I think anyone who is neurodivergent, developing those flexible thinking skills, that is where it's at. I'm going to have that linked in the show notes below. And if you want another podcast episode to listen to after this one, I did a podcast episode on how to be more consistent with the marble method. It goes along really well with this podcast episode. If you're in a state where you're like, oh, I want to develop better, healthier habits, the marble method podcast episode, or I think it's called something different to that, you will enjoy. I'll have that linked in the show notes as well. I appreciate you so much, and I will see you soon.